picture. There we go. Recording is in progress. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now, and I should say that I'm the kind of the rookie on the block here in terms of membership in the society, and I'm kind of leading the way through this session tonight because I put together the PowerPoint. I got through a sequence of events got involved in preparing a PowerPoint with a lot of stuff on it. So that's my role, and I will occasionally want to defer to other people for suggestions. So if so if Lyle or Cecile I could see Lyle, Cecile, and Haley. So if you guys can wave madly at me if there's something that needs to be attended to, I can do that. So just an acknowledgement that this presentation can raise difficult emotions in people and some people. So there's some information here about a crisis line maintained by the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. We can put that in the chat if just so it's available later in the presentation if anybody wants to make use of that. So the John A. Macdonald was kind of the architect of, this is what he says is the kind of a famous quote that he says why he thinks the residential schools were important because it was important in his view that children be taken away from their families and placed in a residential setting so that they could be they could lose the culture and the language he uses here is offensive to most of us today, but that was the basis for, and this is why, for example, Justice Sinclair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission called the residential school system a system for cultural genocide, basically killing cultures. So the person who was actually in charge of the residential school system was early on under John A. Macdonald was a fellow by the name of Duncan Campbell Scott, and this is what he said. Basically, the objective is to continue until there's not a single Indian in Canada that's not been absorbed into the body politic. Again, the policy was intended to assimilate and to end First Nations people, Indigenous people as a distinct group within Canada. The reason why the system was so devastating is that in Indigenous cultures there was already a system of education in place, and that education system was very much based in families and with elders in the community. So removing children from the family and from their communities was devastating to them culturally, and often caused really serious harm in many different ways. I should say that this presentation is indebted to many predecessors. Some of these slides were gifted, were part of a presentation from Don Hepburn, who was one of the founders of our society, and we'll say more about him. So the Red Deer Indian Industrial School was founded in 1893. It opened with a capacity of 52 students who were all in a single room. They slept and ate and studied all in one building, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. The school was administered by the Methodist Church on behalf of the Canadian government. The Methodist Church, as I'll say in a few minutes, became part of the United Church of Canada a few decades later. And so as a result, the Methodist legacy has been taken on by the United Church. Students who attended the school were drawn from the First Nations of Saddle Lake, Whitefish Lake, which are north and east of Edmonton, the Paul Band, which is west of Edmonton near Wabamun area, Sampson, Louisville, and Montana, which are kind of in the what we now call Maskwacis, Morley down west of Calgary, and then those ones are all in Alberta. And then also, strangely, Nelson House in Manitoba, which is 1,500 kilometers away. There were also Métis families who attended Red Deer School.
Ross, can I just say,
yeah,
mention one thing? Red Deer Indian Industrial School, you'll see often, it'll be Red Deer Industrial School. As a board, we decided to use the word Indian because well, in my case, I just don't want them to forget who they did this to. And political correctness notwithstanding.
Okay. Yes, thanks for chiming in on that, because it's you'll notice in some of the Truth and Reconciliation documents that they dropped the Indian, I think for precisely that. So there were, up to 1914, we know of 319 children who were registered, and in the last 5 years, they don't seem to have kept great records. So there were more, but we don't have them. Here's a picture of the school. On the left is the original building that was the dormitory, the classrooms, and the eating facilities. On the right was a dormitory that was built somewhat later, and eased the crowding situation a little bit. Here's a couple of pictures of the whole property from a distance. On the left here is I believe the principal's house. Apparently that's a building that is still standing. And you can see in the bottom picture there's some stables and some other teachers' homes and other kinds of outbuildings. Here's a picture of from 1907 of the whole community of the school, to the extent you can call it a community, of students, staff, and a number of visitors. And one of the things that if you look at a picture like this, or like some of the next ones, and think about a fifth to a quarter of the students that you see in these pictures did not survive. This is a picture of a group from the Saddle Lake Reserve who arrived in Red Deer, accompanying their children to the school, and apparently that picture is taken at the old train station in Red Deer, which is now, I think, where the superstore is downtown. And there's one of the things that was striking to me about this picture and the next one is that the families, we often hear that the children were forcibly taken from their communities, and that's often the case. And but the families did not abandon them. The families were quite intentional about keeping in touch with their children. So this group from the White Whale Indians, as they're called, from the Paul Band, which is up by Wabamun, walked over 100 miles to visit their children at the Red Deer Industrial School, Indian Industrial School. Cecile, do you want to tell the story of this gentleman in the bottom right here?
Sure. When I went to visit the Paul Band in the very beginning, to take to them the student register, which identified students that had come from what was then known as the White Whale Mission, and to share with them other research that had been done. I met with Dennis Paul and his mother, and I had these pictures along with me too. And she identified this man here as her father, I believe it was. Yes, and because she was a very elderly woman herself. And again, and I've experienced this so many times, the meaning and the value of photos just made it so clear about identity and being connected to ancestors and past generations, and people identifying characteristics in the faces that they see in descendants. And it's just so beautiful to see.
So I noticed that Velvet has her hand up. I'm going to ask that people keep their questions till the end. So just make a note of any questions or comments you want to make, because there's so many of us here. There are 60 now, 60 participants, and if we were to stop every time somebody has a question, we may not get to the end. So I would like to finish.
Velvet, I would suggest that maybe put your question in the chat even.
Yeah, you can put it in the chat. That'd be great. Thank you. So, but thank you for raising your hand, and thank you for your interest. All right. So, yeah. Why am I not? So this is another picture of this. This is of girls at the school, and one of the I found this really interesting picture because it seems to me to kind of convey a couple of things about the school. One of them is that each of these girls has been given a doll, and those dolls apparently came from women's groups across the country who were supporting the school financially and in other ways, and they wanted to be a positive presence in the life of these children. That's what they thought this school was about. And but if you look carefully, every one of those dolls is a Caucasian, has Caucasian features and coloring. So they sent these dolls so this picture at the same time conveys both kind of the paternalistic kind of belief that this school was a positive thing for the children, but also the colonialism that was implicit in it.
For us on that,
yeah.
On that last picture, the girl in the middle, maybe Cecile can help with this. On the left-hand side, middle row, I've seen her in a picture beside Ralph Steinhauer. Am I recognizing her correctly, Cecile?
I don't know, but that's a keen observation. And if that's the case, it would be his sister, because they attended together. Yeah.
Yeah, that just popped up the other night. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I have a picture of the two of them later on. So.
Oh, okay, good.
So apparently about half the day was spent in classroom learning. And so the reading, writing, arithmetic, there's a picture, this has become quite a famous picture of them practicing their penmanship on the chalkboard. And then also there was, because this was an industrial school, they were preparing these children to be laboring class people, farmers, farm hands, and the girls were being taught domestic arts, and so there's pictures of them learning to sew and that kind of thing. So, but here's a gardening that you can see both boys and girls together planting seeds for their gardening class. There's also some lumbering kind of operations going on, and apparently lumbering was a big part of the Morley economy for a while. There was also some animal husbandry that was taught there. You can see the stable on the right that we saw from the distance earlier.
One of the things that's interesting about this is that oftentimes this worked. And if you look at Alan Sapp's paintings, I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. He paints of a time when folks that have been trained this way were quite successful. They go back to their home reserve and they were able to, become ranchers and farmers and so on and so forth. And then the local farmers went to their MPs and said, we don't want to compete with these Indians, and they cut off their, what do you call it, access to market. So that it didn't quite work out the way they thought it would.
It wasn't completely all work though. There was apparently a hockey team, and so some opportunity for recreation.
Can I just go back to that picture of the gentleman from Paul Band? Velvet is actually Dennis Paul, and he's identified that man was his mother's grandpa, William Bearhead.
Ah, we got a
And-
name. Great.
William Bearhead, and
William Bearhead.
Mom's dad, Edward, a Métis and band member, was one of the registered students at the industrial school. He was 9 years old in 1914, the year the photo was taken.
Wow.
So I'm wondering whether you might be able to identify Edward in any of these pictures. And just to say, if anybody can identify anyone in these pictures, the United Church Archives is very much keen to collect those names. And if you go to the United Church Archives site, you can contact them through there.
Great.
Thank you for sharing that. That's great.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you, Velvet.
And now, all right. Sorry, it seems to get stuck when I do that. So, okay, so we were on the.
And
the
Ross,
hockey
if
team.
you can just keep speaking up or moving closer to your mic, people are having a little trouble hearing you.
All right, thank you. Okay. All right, I will try to project.
That's better.
All right. So the reason why there's a cemetery and why the Remembering the Children's Society exists is because of the cemetery. And the reason why there's a cemetery is that there was a number of children who died at the Red Deer Industrial School. We're not exactly sure precisely how many died. One study identified 45 students who died during the life of the school between 1892 and 1919. The school didn't open until 1893, so I don't know how it was that one of the students died before the school opened, but apparently that's the case.
It's not a student, Ross.
Okay.
The cemetery was actually a mission cemetery to begin with.
Okay.
And so I believe this was an adult who was the first one buried there.
All right. Okay. Okay. So yeah, so there were deaths among staff and their families, some of whom were buried in the cemetery. There were also some community members who were buried there as well. The National Memorial Register of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation records 70 names, some of which are probably duplicates, and some of whom are people who may have died after returning back to their communities. So that's why it's a little bit tricky to try and figure out exactly how many students died.
Well, that's why the number fluctuates so much, is because we've always gone with sort of the 20-25%. And so if you apply that to the 70 number, that's one number. And if you apply it to the other numbers, it's quite another. So that's why we're still doing the work. In 1907, there was a study of the residential school systems in Manitoba and Northwest Territories, which is what Alberta and Saskatchewan used to be called. And Dr. P.H. Bryce noted that Red Deer had the worst mortality rate of the schools he examined, which is really saying something, because they were all pretty bad. There was a lot of deaths in the schools. And what's really even more telling is that the report was virtually ignored by the superintendent, Duncan Cameron Scott, who we met earlier. But he said it's quite within the mark to say that 50% of the children who passed through these schools did not live to benefit from the education that they had received therein. And even though he acknowledged that, he said
the benefit of the schools it's sufficient to justify that kind of a death rate. So he thought up to 50% of the children might not live to benefit from that education, but even so, he believed in it. So it's a staggering kind of statement on his part. Factors contributing to deaths at the Red Deer Indian Industrial School. Inadequate funding was a major issue, probably contributed to poor quality food, certainly to inadequate staffing. And part of the reason for that is that just as the school was opening, the government switched the funding system from basically covering expenses of the school to giving the school a per capita grant, and the per capita grant was inadequate right from the very beginning. So overcrowding conditions was an issue, which was related to poor ventilation, and particularly for respiratory diseases like the flu and tuberculosis. The poor ventilation was a huge issue. There was also poor sanitation system. The water well was often contaminated, and that led all of those things together contributed to frequent outbreaks of disease. And then the death rate at the schools was quite a bit higher than it was among children who stayed in their communities.
So Charlene Burns wanted to ask how many children died from beatings and physical abuse.
I don't know if we know the answer to that question.
There's just in the chat.
Yeah. We do have I think we have there are some documents that list a cause of death. And I don't remember seeing that named.
I can speak to that a little bit later when we talk about Albert.
All right, sure. Okay, so here are the children who died. This is from the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation from their record. So there's 70 names on that list. You can see that some of the names are repeated a couple of times. Some of them are very similar. So I think there are a number of repetitions on that list. I think when they were creating this list, they didn't want to leave anyone off, and so even if it seemed like there was a duplication, they included it. At some point, I want to actually read this list out loud. Maybe we can do that at the end. I don't want to take the time to do it.
It'd be interesting to go to Edmonton to the archives because they have the attendance list all written out by hand, and the one we have is an interpretation by one of the volunteers way back in the day. I think it would be interesting to project it up on a wall and have 3 or 4 people sort of sit down and have a look at those names and see if we can make any more sense out of them. Yeah.
So yeah, so each of these children deserves to be remembered. Each of them deserved a longer life. So part of what we want to do is just to remembering the children is about honoring and respecting them as individuals, gifts of God who deserve better. This is a letter that was written in November of 1918, which was right during the Spanish flu epidemic. It's a letter written by the principal of the Red Deer School. And it informs the Department of Indian Affairs in Ottawa that 5 children died within a period of 2 or 3 days from the Spanish flu. One of them, William Cardinal, was actually running. He ran away and died while he was trying to return home to his community in Saddle Lake. And the other 4. Everybody basically in the whole school got sick, and so they weren't able to kind of deal with these 4 children who died on site, and so they were the principal asked that they be buried by the local undertaker in the Red Deer Cemetery. So we'll come back to that. So they were buried, 2 children to a grave, that the graves were unmarked until 2017. And that's the, so we'll come back to that in a moment. But partly as a result of that kind of real tragic event that was part of the major pandemic, the Spanish flu that killed, I've heard estimates from 30 to 80 million people worldwide. The Red Deer Industrial School was closed within the year, and unfortunately, we didn't learn that lesson, or the church didn't learn that lesson, the government didn't learn that lesson, and they moved the Edmonton Industrial School to, they opened a replacement in Edmonton. After it was closed in 1919, the buildings, the dormitory was torn down. This building, which was the main building, was derelict until it was torn down in 1971. As I mentioned, the principal's house still stands. And this is the cemetery site in 2009. It was acquired, so that there's two families that own the property on which this industrial school stands. The Moore family acquired the cemetery, the land in which the cemetery was, after World War II, and it's been in their family ever since. So there are some key developments after the closing of the school in 1919. In 1925, the Methodist Church became part of the United Church of Canada. In 1948, the United Church withdrew from the federal residential school program, mainly, I think, because of concerns about, both the whole philosophy and also about the high mortality rates and the illnesses and those kinds of things. In 1986, the United Church apologized to its Indigenous peoples for its colonial understanding of the Christian message. In 1988, the Indigenous communities within the United Church of Canada achieved a form of self-governance in what was called the All Native Circle Conference. Now, that's a bit sweeping statement. Not all the congregations, the Indigenous congregations, joined into the All Native Circle Conference, but most of them did. The ones in British Columbia did not. So, and then in 1998, the United Church apologized for its participation in the residential school system. So again, I'm focusing on the United Church because the Red Deer School was a Methodist school that, so the United Church is basically responsible for that part of its history. In sort of later developments in the wider community, the wider society, in 2006, there was a class action lawsuit of survivors of residential school that was settled in a comprehensive agreement that involved the government, all the churches who were involved in running the schools, and the plaintiffs in the class action lawsuit. And in 2008, there was an apology, and the apology was part of the agreement, I think. But that apology was issued on June 11th of 2008. I'm going to come back to that date because it becomes, there's a reason why I kind of put that date in. And also in 2008, the formation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission intended to look into the whole history of that and what we need to learn. Continuing with key developments, this time on a local level, in 1983, the Red Deer Indian Industrial School was recorded as an archaeological site. There wasn't much done at that point, but it was at least named. 1987, there's a kind of interesting story here. I'm going to ask Lyle to share that story. There are actually a couple stories about the events of 1987.
Well, in 1987, I was, contrary to the McLeans, I was actually in my 30s, my 20s. But anyway, Albert Lightning comes in. I think pretty well everybody here from Indian country has an Albert Lightning story. And he comes in and he says, oh, there you are. You're the one that's going to find my brother. Well, now I've been quite used to old elders, sort of knowing things. So I said, okay, where is your brother? And they said, well, we both went to the Red Deer Indian Industrial School and he died there, and we don't know where they put him. And so I thought, was be working at the museum, you could help out. So I did. I went out and I found him up at the Red Deer school or cemetery, and he was buried with the 3 others that was on that list. And we talked actually for quite a while. We probably sat with him for a couple of days, 4 hours or something like this, recorded his experiences and so on. And this is where, he talked about, I don't know, you find that people who have gone to these schools tend to minimize somehow. And I think that's probably because that way they don't have, doesn't have to be so painful for them, but he did say things like, you had to watch out for that guy down by the horse corral, because he was mean and he laid beatings on people, and there'd be different stories like this, but he would never come right out and say that there was a murder, or there was this kind of stuff, because I think people have to be able to live with their memories, and I'm not quite sure how that goes. I know 2 other people who told me about a love story where they both ran away from schools and got married. And another one told me about 1957. Here's this guy on TV with black hair, wiggling, I guess his bottom, but you couldn't see that. Well, all the guys thought this was pretty cool, so they went down to the kitchen and got the lard and put it on their hair, and they all went around looking like Elvis Presley. So anyway, so like I say, you have to. People have to live with that, and I'm not quite. A lot of times, people use humor. All right.
Thank you, Lyle. So you were working at the museum at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Museum, right? Yeah.
Well, it was the same summer, and along comes Mr. Moore Senior, and and he had lived with this as he knew this was a cemetery for many years, and he wanted to donate the headboards that were there. Now this was 87 and it closed in 19, so that was only 70 years. No, we're 50. Anyway, there's a the magic 75-year line where you're allowed to donate things, and it was still within this. So the Morris Llewellyn actually from that time rejected them and asked him to go put them back in the cemetery, because that's where headboards belong. And wisely, Mr. Moore did not do that. He took them, wrapped them in burlap, and put them in a garage. And so 25 years later, we'll see this in a bit of our presentation, they were around for us to commemorate.
Thank you, Lyle. So Lyle sat with that kind of knowledge of the cemetery and the industrial school for 25 years, almost 25 years. And he tells me that he kind of always kind of wondered what to do with it. And then in 2005, some people at Sunnybrook United Church were kind of they did something called a month of Sundays that raised a bunch of social justice issues. And somebody said, one of the speakers said, you should, one of the speakers, I think, who is from Zimbabwe?
South Africa.
They asked, the people from the church asked, what can we do to support you? And the person said, well, you could address your own issues, like Indigenous issues in Canada. And so they went to Lyle, and Lyle said, well, you could do something with the cemetery.
Well, we did another month of Sundays as well.
Oh, okay.
And then after that, it was the same question. So how could we help you? Well, there is just this little thing that maybe you could give us a hand with. And they did.
So yeah, Don Hepburn and others from the Faith and Justice group at Sunnybrook United Church decided to take this on.
What's that?
So
what's happening? The H word in your last.
What's a habendum clause?
I copied that from somewhere else, and I actually don't know what it means.
Okay.
An addendum clause was was put on by the cemeteries registrar. It's a clause on the land title deed that says there is
cemetery.
graves on this site, and there's a need to if the land is going up for sale or development permits, that you need to pay attention to this.
Sort of like a lien then, except for a very
Caveat,
specific-
whatever you like, yeah.
Mm.
Special word
Right.
for graveyards.
So this got triggered apparently in 2008. There was a proposal to develop the land on which the cemetery exists, and I think Cecile became involved in that point, and Lyle, you can see Lyle in these pictures. So there was now for some reason, there we are. There was a requirement for an historical resources impact assessment. And that was conducted in response to the development application. And so this is the assessment basically involved a sort of an archaeologist, I guess, coming in and doing a study, a survey of the site, and this is what he came up with. So there was.
Go back. Can you go back to that slide for a sec, please?
Yeah.
So before they they did all the brushing and they kind of knew where things were, but before they started, they called. I'm not sure how they got a hold of me, but they did in Sunnybrook. And before they would actually go to work, they wanted somebody to come down and do ceremony. And so I called my elder and I said, well, okay, that's a little bit over my head. And he said, no, you're fine, but make sure that you get a Christian minister as well, because not all these kids were traditional, and you need somebody, from that tradition to pray over them as well. So standing beside me is Reverend Linda Irving, who did prayers as well.
Right. Oh, we just skipped by. Okay. So this is the map of the cemetery that was produced by that assessment, that survey work. It involved ground penetrating radar. I think not quite as an advanced ground penetrating radar system as would be available now. They did some soil stripping. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. And some survey work. They identified a 10 by 15 meter area. They found approximately 20 elongated depressions that either are probable graves or possible graves. So it's possible that there were two kids buried, or people buried per grave, but there's still some that still doesn't account for all of the kids that we think passed away at the school.
Now, when Terry was doing his machine, he said somebody's going to have to come back and finish this, and I think there's some developments along those lines.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
So this is a picture of the soil stripping. So they actually dug through the leaf litter and the accumulated overburden, and they uncovered the clay cap that shows that there was clay filled these rectangular holes, rectangular graves, and so there are at least two, pretty clearly two graves in this location.
And when we were doing that, the people were concerned that people were sort of digging into the graves, and Terry reassured everyone that that this was 5, maybe 6 inches at the very most. They never opened the grave. The one thing that was interesting, that one head, well, actually in all of them, they found the remains of those headboards, those little bits of wood in the ground.
So that was 2008, right? And
Yeah.
So the next year, in the spring, United Church representatives, both from Sunnybrook, and also Cecile was very involved in. Cecile, you probably did more than your fair share of that
You
work.
gathered most of these people.
Visiting visiting the communities in Alberta that sent children to this school, connecting with each of the bands in order to consult with them about recognition of the site. And as a result, in September, there was this group of people who assembled, visited the site of the school for the first time, and here you see them gathered at the cemetery, the elders and helpers. So
Now this group told me to take blankets and tobacco to both the landowner, the Moores, and the other ones that were partial owners, the Poles, and to thank them for looking after these children. And that was more grace than I had in my bones, but I did it, and it actually felt good in the end.
So following that gathering at the site, the gathering of representatives, they struck a working group to host the plan was to host a series of feasts, ceremonial feasts, to remember the children and to set their spirits free, according to Indigenous ways of understanding death and the afterlife. The Sunnybrook United Church hosted those meetings. They were funded by the national office as part of our commitment to reconciliation and commitment to righting the wrongs of the residential school system. So that first ceremonial feast was held on June 30th, 2010. It was a big deal. There were over 450 people there. It was held at Fort Normandeau, which is right across the Red Deer River from the site of the old school. And most of the home communities were represented, including Nelson House, which was, as I said, 1,500 miles away. And all three of the Truth and Reconciliation Commissioners were present, because the TNR commission had been established by that point. Also, the moderator of the United Church of Canada was there. It was a really kind of pretty impressive event. So some of these pictures I had to capture them from a brochure, so they're not the greatest quality, but here you see one of the things that happened at that event was that the name of every student who had been identified as attending the school was read aloud. And if I can just say a personal word at this point, and they were read aloud by the descendants of some of these people. So Métis, Saddle Lake, and some of the other communities that they were from. If I can just say a personal word, I was there at this event, and I remember hearing they were going to read, like 315 names, and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be like a university convocation. It's going to be like one name after another. None of them are going to mean anything to me. And as the names were read, and they were read kind of in alphabetical order of the last name, I remember thinking, and there would be like 7 or 8 names from with the same last name, the same family. And I remember being just really moved by the realization that all of the children from these families were taken away, and that and I remember thinking about, what does that do to a community when all the children are gone? We're going through some, in the church, we're going through a lot of that now. And there's, I find myself grieving over the loss of children, and that kind of minor grief that I have over the kind of the loss of the children in the church community wouldn't have been even. I don't mean to minimize how much more profound that would have been in First Nations communities and Métis communities. But that was kind of the way I was able to kind of identify with the impact of these names being read one after another, 7, 8, 9, 10 children with the same name. Each of the families who were present, who had identified themselves as connecting with one of the names that were being read, was given a memorial pouch. So here's Reverend Nelson Hart, who is from the Nelson House in Manitoba, a United Church minister and the Indigenous community, Indigenous congregation there. His one of his ancestors or part of his family's had attended the school, so he was presented with a pouch by Charles Wood. Was the first president of the Remembering the Children Society, and he is, I believe, from Saddle Lake. Eric Large, I think, also is from Saddle Lake, so he was also an active participant early on in Remembering the Children's Society. So he's reading names as this is happening. The feast carried on. There was a big feast. A feast involves a lot of preparation. So here you see some of the people who were involved in preparing the feast. I think the ladies in the back here are peeling potatoes, and I don't know what the others are doing, but you can see there's a lot of mayonnaise involved, and I don't know what all that was involved, but it obviously a huge amount of work went into preparing for this. And here's the actual feast. All the food is laid out in the middle, and people gather around.
Now this is done in a traditional way, with the food laid out in the middle, and then there'll be servers that would come around and serve each individual person. This is just the Cree way of doing things.
It's not a buffet. Everybody gets served. Yeah. So that happened in 2010. There were 3 more ceremony feasts that I'll come to in a minute. But in 2011, the society was actually organized and formed. So there was a working group that started working in 2009 and spent a year preparing for that feast. And then in 2011, they organized themselves into a society under the Societies Act of Alberta. And one of the first things that they did was to prepare and publish this booklet called Remembering the Children, Guidelines for Initiating Projects Involving Indian Residential Schools and Unmarked Burials. That was then circulated. I think it was circulated by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, was it not?
Yes.
Cecile? Yeah.
Yeah, by the Missing Children's Project, precisely.
Thank you. These are the objectives of the society. It's focused on cemeteries of Indian residential schools. So we have largely focused on the Red Deer Indian Industrial Schools so far, but we have also kind of worked with other groups who are commemorating other Indian residential schools in Alberta. Of course, the overarching goal is to facilitate reconciliation and right relations between and within Indigenous families, communities, churches, governments, and other Canadians. So in June 11th, June of 2011, you remember the story that Lyle told about the farmer, the Moore Moore family, bringing these the wooden headboards or grave markers to the Red Deer Museum and Art Gallery and being told, no, we can't take them. And the Moore family went and put them in a dry place because they were clearly in a pretty advanced state of deterioration. So in June of 2011, we were finally able to bring that around so that those boards could be transferred to the Red Deer Museum and Art Gallery. They're now part of a permanent, at least one of them is a part of a permanent exhibit there that opened in 2013. So here's a couple of pictures of the ceremony that was involved in, there was a kind of a parade, not a parade, but a procession involving many of the members of the Remembering the Children Society. And the headboards are actually carried by 4 children with Indigenous ancestry. And you see them there holding the boards at the front. And there's a bit of color and ceremony involved in these things.
Funny story, the one fellow was a little bit bored, so he sat there and picked pieces of wood off the end of the headboard, much to the chagrin of the museum person.
The museum archivist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that fellow there, it looks like he's.
It's
working
okay.
on something.
There was some,
One of those is your daughter, isn't it, Lyle?
yeah, correct, just on the left-hand side of the wheel there, yeah.
One of them is a lightning grandson too.
Yes, Talon.
Yeah.
Mhm. And actually, the 4th girl is the daughter of Paul Duval, and I believe she was adopted from Romania.
Yeah, she was.
So that was 2011. In June of 2012, there was a 3rd feast.
There you go.
This is the invitation on the right-hand side, the invitation to the feast. And there was a lot of focus at this one was on storytelling. And so here's a couple of the stories that were told. One of them about Albert Lightning. You've heard his name a couple of times. He was the fellow that came to Lyle at the Red Deer Museum. He was a really important leader in the Indigenous community in Alberta, and really influential in bringing together the different groups in order to get them working together. And so a really important figure in the Indigenous community. He was a student at the school. And so that's a picture from his school days. Maybe not from his school days, but
I think it was.
Pardon me?
I think it was actually, but
Yes. Mhm.
It doesn't look like a school uniform though. Anyway, so this picture is of Minnie and Ralph Apau, or I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce her last name. My understanding is that these were the children of a graduate of the Red Deer School. And these children were later adopted by the Steiner family. They took on the Steiner name. And so Ralph Steiner, you may well have heard of, he was the first Indigenous Lieutenant Governor of Alberta, a well-known author and quite a remarkable fellow as well. So just 2 of the really significant people in Alberta history who have been connected with the Red Deer School.
Actually, Ross, the beginning of that story is a little bit off. Minnie and Ralph's father died, and their mother was not able to look after them, and she put them in the school for a year.
Oh,
And
so
then she remarried to a man by the name of Steinhauer, and he
Okay.
adopted them.
okay. So
and
you
the
might
little
want to.
girl is that girl that I thought was in that other picture, but I don't know, just a guess.
Yeah.
So the story I told, I got off the United Church archive. So there might need to be some correction to that archive.
Yes. Yeah. Well, this is how it's unfolding. Yes.
Yep, it always does.
So the storytelling kind of get enough people together and you get
Mhm.
a little bit more information. So again, this is the 2012 gathering. It happened on the grounds of Sunnybrook United Church in a large tent, and there was a lot of storytelling from descendants of the students at the school. This is a picture of this man here, Bill McLean, was the son of George McLean, also known as Chief Walking Buffalo, who was a student at the school for early on in its second year actually. So, and then finally, a final feast at Fort Normandeau in June of 2013 that also included the reading of the names of 325 students. Justice Sinclair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission attended that feast, and Charles Wood, who was the first president of the Remembering Children Society, was the MC, and again there were memorial gifts. In this case, tiny moccasins that were given out to the descendants of the Red Deer Industrial School students of the Indian Industrial School. The reason why some of these people were here, were at that feast, was because they were all there for a hearing, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearing that was held at Red Deer College just prior to that feast. I put the slides out of order just to keep the kind of the story, the narrative kind of clear. But you can, here again, you see the Reverend Nelson Hart, who is, I'm not sure if he's unilingual Cree, but his first language is definitely Cree. And so he's testifying, and Darlene Auger translated. You see in this picture a panel on reconciliation, and you may recognize some of the people. Maggie Hodgson was the moderator. The Honorable Joe Clark, former Prime Minister, he was an honorary witness at the hearing. Muriel Stanley Venn has been a long-term Métis member of the Remembering the Children Society, and a prominent figure in the Métis community in Alberta. The very Reverend Bill Phipps, the former moderator of the United Church of Canada, who's had a long-standing relationship with Indigenous peoples as well, and Terry Lusty as well. I don't know Terry Lusty, I can't say anything about him. Cecile, do you want to speak to these next two slides? This one about the bentwood box, and the next one about the blanket, memorial blanket.
Sure. At the last national TRC event, which was held in Edmonton in 2014, and as it was with all the national events, there was an opportunity for groups to offer expressions of reconciliation that were deposited in this beautiful bentwood box. If you go to the National Truth and Reconciliation Center now, you can see that there, and all of the things that were put into that box are on display there. And that the carving on the box is the symbol for the center as well. And so the society decided that we would offer our expression, and it included the list of the students who went to the school, a couple of the mementos that had been given out at the feast, and the program booklets and so forth. And so Richard Lightning and Charles Wood and Muriel Stanley Venn and myself were the ones that offered that day. So that was, it felt like a very good way to honor the work that had been done. And if you go to the next slide, another way that the children have been remembered in a national way was in this creation of this witness blanket. A carver by the name of Kerry Newman from the West Coast, he decided to collect items from all of the residential schools across Canada. And we were able to contribute one of the sandstone blocks from the school so that it's in this big panel. It's just very moving, and actually you can go to the Witness Blanket website, and there's QR codes that will tell you the story of every piece that is in that panel and who contributed it and what its meaning or history is. And this witness blanket is on display now in the Canadian Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg. And it was on exhibit in the Red Deer Museum as well. And behind me, I don't know if you see it, but I have the blanket that was given to us and I contributed something else to it as well. So they gave blankets to everybody that.
Just show us the blanket again, Cecile. I stopped, I put aside the. So can you show us the blanket again that you were, the blanket behind you? Oh,
Just right behind me,
okay.
yes.
All right. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Yeah. So it keeps me warm sometimes.
Good. All right.
So yeah, is that the end of the PowerPoint presentation?
Not quite, not quite.
Okay.
No, so we still have a few more slides. So in 2014 in June, the society arranged for this storyboard to be incorporated into the Fort Normandeau Historical Park. So it's located at a site that looks across the river to where the school was located, and it includes some of the pictures that you've already seen. And that happened on June the 11th, which was significantly the day that the Prime Minister of Canada apologized for the residential school system. And so on that day, June 11th, the city of Red Deer declared June 11th to be in perpetuity, remembering the Children's Day in Red Deer. So now it is in perpetuity, so it's supposed to be forever, but somebody has to remind the mayor every year. So the challenge has been to organize ourselves to make sure that the mayor gets reminded, because it's on us, it's on the community to remind the mayor, not on the mayor to remember. And that's just the way these proclamations work for when they proclaim a day in honor of something. They ask that the community basically take responsibility for it, not leave it all on the mayor. Oh, sorry, I went too far there. Okay. So 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report was issued. There are 94 calls to action, I believe, and about 6 of them relate to cemeteries and children who were missing or were died in the schools. So I've included 3 of the ones that are most pertinent to us. One of the things that was striking to me is that I think we pretty much observed all of this. I'm not sure, and maybe even served as a bit of a maybe they learned that the commissioners kind of got some of this from us. So I don't mean to be arrogant or
Oh, blow our own horn.
Well, yeah. Well, I think we should celebrate the work of the Remembering Children Society.
Exactly right.
And so that's why I put in this next 2 slides. So in 2016, there was a professor, a scholar at the Carleton University in Ottawa, a Korean woman named Augustine Park, who published a study of this society, the Remembering Children Society. And she was very complimentary of the work that was done by the society. She called our work a model of community-based restorative justice. And I just thought it would be worth kind of reading you the abstract from that paper. It's a bit academic, but it does give people a sense of kind of the approach that was taken by the society and why that approach was important. So the abstract begins. An abstract is a summary of an academic article, and it appears at the beginning. So lots of people just read the abstracts, and if they're interested, then they go on and they read the whole thing. So this is a summary of the whole article, which is 15 or 20 pages long. So this article argues for community-based restorative justice. So CBRJ, community-based restorative justice, to confront the atrocities of residential schools in Alberta. The Remembering the Children Society, that's us, engages in a decolonizing form of CBRJ, again, community-based restorative justice. So it's about undoing the work of colonization. Remember that the United Church and other churches have apologized for their colonial approach to mission and to the presentation of the Christian gospel. So the way we've been colonized, or we've been engaged in colonizing, how do we decolonize? Here's a way to do it. You place primacy on indigenous cultures, and the way that Remembering the Children's Society did it was they engaged in feasts and ceremonies. They freed the children of the spirits who died. Children who died. They focused on the centrality of elders, and they worked intentionally with Aboriginal spirituality and worldviews on working together. So as you heard, the Remembering the Children's Society is a group of people working together, people from both First Nations and Métis, and also other Canadians. The centrality, and again, this is still the words of Professor Augustine Park, the centrality of cultures contributes to decolonization through cultural resistance in the face of assimilation. And remember, that was the point of the residential schools, was to assimilate First Nations communities into the white society. And that's what's been called, that assimilation has been called cultural genocide. So a cultural resistance in the face of cultural genocide. That's the healing power of cultural resurgence, the development of mutually honoring partnerships, and the topic of decolonizing truths. So she concludes, I consider the broader impacts of the Remembering the Children's Society in helping transform official narratives about residential schools. That's the abstract of that article. I just thought it would be, it's a bit kind of academic in its language, but I think it's really important that that we see reflected as in a mirror the work that the Remembering the Children's Society did by this scholar from Ottawa, a Korean scholar from Ottawa, a Korean woman who was a scholar from Ottawa. I mentioned she's Korean because she gave it at the end of her study period, when she interviewed so many members of the society and others. She gave the society a Korean drum, which is held in the sanctuary of Sunnybrook United Church as part of the display, the residential school display there. 2017, to September of 2017, you remember that there were 4 students, there were 5 students who passed away from the flu, the Spanish flu, in November of 1918. 4 of them were buried in the Red Deer City Cemetery because of everybody at the school was sick. So the society did fundraising and arranged for a permanent grave marker to be installed in the Red Deer Cemetery at the site of those 2 graves, 2 graves for 4 people, 2 per grave. The day began with a kind of an assembly in the, I think it was a junior high school nearby on the Michener site. You can see there were hundreds of people there. Most of the students at the school are sitting in a circle. I still remember how impressed I was with those students, because the president of the society at that time, or one of the key figures, Richard Lightning, was delayed by an accident on the highway, and he was like an hour late, and so everybody had to wait for for him, because we really couldn't do it without him. Partly because it was his uncle. His uncle was one of the people buried there. But those students and everybody kind of sat and very respectfully waited for him to arrive. And then, so there were speeches there, and then everybody made their way in a procession over to the cemetery. And this is on the left is the one side of that marker with the names of the 4 children who died, all of them between 13 and 14 years old in 1918. And then on the flip side, there's kind of the story and a quotation from that letter. I showed you the letter earlier in a previous slide. There's also a picture of the school. Here you see Richard Lightning, so his father was Albert Lightning, and his uncle was David Lightning, who died at the school and who's memorialized on this marker. And then the woman kneeling is Angela Lightning, Richard's daughter. So they're remembering their uncle and great uncle, who they never met because he died at the age of 14. Just by way of celebrating the work of the Remembering the Children's Society, I also kind of point out that in 2017, the St. Stephen's College, the college affiliated with the United Church of Canada, historically affiliated with the United Church of Canada, and on this and affiliated also with the University of Alberta, awarded honorary Doctor of Sacred Letters degrees to Lyle, Keewatin, Richards, and also to Don Hepburn for their Remembering the Children work. Don was unable to attend the ceremony because of poor health, but here you see Lyle accepting the honor. And Cecile Fossack, who is also with us today, delivered a beautiful convocation address that night. Because Don was unable to attend the ceremony, sometime later, the principal of St. Stephen's College, Dr. Fred Tappenden, came down to Red Deer and met with Joan Hepburn here, Lyle, Lyle's partner Pat, and myself, and we went to visit Don. Don was gravely ill at that point, and actually he only lived for a few more days. So we didn't take a picture with him. It just wouldn't have been respectful. But so that's the degree, Doctor of Sacred Letters. So we're getting towards the end. Quite recent activities now. This first slide kind of is about the cemetery site. It's now been purchased by the government of Alberta from the private landowner, the Moore family, so that it's now protected in perpetuity from industrial or residential impacts, and we can start planning for how it's going to look in the long term. In January of 2019, the government department, Alberta Culture and Tourism, secured long-term access to that cemetery site across from the adjoining property, so it is possible now to walk to it without permission of the landowner. And then got interrupted a bit by the pandemic, but in March of 2019, and again in February of 2021, Alberta Culture is initiating engagement with 9 Indigenous communities about what to do with that cemetery site. And the exciting news from, I think it was yesterday, the day before.
Yesterday.
Breaking news is that this coming week, Tuesday, day after the election, the follow-up ground penetrating radio study, the more advanced study of that site will be conducted. We've been waiting for that to happen. So that's really exciting news from yesterday. So you heard it here first, folks. Another thing this society has been doing is working with the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, which is the body that was created at the end of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2015 to hold and continue the work and hold all of the research and the documents and the archives. So this is their page. It's actually my reworking of the page to get it all, to try and get some of the things on one slide. Interesting picture of a girls program. And see the sewing machines that they're working with as they're learning some trade.
One of the things that, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, just, having the research that's being done on the site, didn't happen just like that, because for a long time we were the Red Deer Indian Industrial School was not recognized as one of the schools, because one, it was too old, there was no survivors, and so on and so forth. And our MP Blaine Calkin was actually quite moved by the whole story of Kamloops, and he phones up and says, well, what can I do? And I says, well, maybe you could help us with this. So he gets up in the House of Commons in Ottawa, and says, why is it the Red Deer Indian Industrial School is not recognized? as one of the schools, as it was one of the first the first schools, and at a horrible rate. And remembering the Children's Society deserves some support. Okay, way to go, mate. So and shortly thereafter, 6 weeks or so, and here we are getting the research done. And maybe 2 months.
So February of this year, the Society sponsored an online panel discussion on the inclusion of Indian residential school history in the draft Alberta curriculum. There are members of the Society and other members of the Indigenous community quite concerned about the minimization of information in that curriculum. And so that a good turnout for that event. And there was a letter circulated in response and asking the government to rework some of that. In June 21st is National Indigenous Peoples Day, and because of the pandemic this year, we didn't have normally there would be in Red Deer, there would be a significant gathering, and so rather than have a gathering this year, there was a video that involved that I think is on YouTube. You can find it. And then June, some of our members have done kind of yeoman's work, stalwart work in responding. There's been a huge amount of media interest because of the attention that was given to cemeteries discovered with 215 unmarked graves in Kamloops, near Kamloops, and then in Saskatchewan, name of the community I've forgotten, where more than 700 unmarked graves, and then it's gone on from there. So there's been, so I know Lyle did a lot of that, Cecile did a lot of that, Richard did a lot of that. Haley also did a fair bit of that. Who have I forgotten? Okay.
Haley was our stick handler. As the request came in, she sort of shot them to one or the other of us.
I think Brian St. Germain too did some of the.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Some of the calls.
Thanks, Haley. Okay, so that brings us up to the present, pretty much. And so, I mean, our goals are basically to complete the work of recognizing, commemorating the children buried at the Red Deer School Cemetery. We're hoping to work out some issues around monument and what the roads will look like, how it will be signed, and all that kind of thing, and also continue to do education around education and why it's important to keep remembering this. I'll come back to that in a minute. We're hopefully also will be supporting other communities as they seek to remember the children who died at other residential schools. We have an annual general meeting coming up. It'd be great if all 62 or whatever it was, the maximum number of this group. This is a fantastic turnout. I want to thank everybody for attending, and you've all held in there really well. There's still 61 people participating, and that's fantastic. So again, that's November 23rd is our annual general meeting in the evening. If you are moved to kind of help, we're always looking for volunteers. As you can tell from the description, this is time-consuming work. It requires a lot of careful communication, consultation, making sure people are heard, making sure they have an opportunity to speak, and building relationships. That doesn't happen quickly, and it shouldn't happen quickly. It needs to take the time it needs to take. So we do need volunteers. We're looking for people to continue to contribute to the work of the society. And if you'd like to, if you're interested, then please speak to one of the members who are
Will our invitation to the AGM be put up the same way this was?
Yes,
Through Eventbrite? Okay. And on our Facebook page.
and through other church newsletters and it was through the school boards too, I
Okay.
think Haley did, so
Good. Okay.
many paths.
Okay. So that brings us to the questions and discussion period. So I'm going to just flag a question that I want to close with. And that question is, and I'm going to invite, whoever wants to speak to it, to speak to it at the end. I'm going to give you a heads up. So my question is simply this. I have my own answer to this question, but I would like to hear, particularly from Lyle and from Cecile and some of the others, why is it important to remember the children? What's that about? I mean, you so often hear people say, it happened in the past, let's just let the past be the past. So we'll come back to that question. Somebody might have already thought of it and put it in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point, and I'm going to unmute everybody. Oh, nobody. So I'm going to invite people, if you want to contribute to discussion, to raise your hand. And Cecile, can you monitor this and just kind of alert us to who's coming up first?
I'll have to get seeing the whole screen here so that I can see hands up.
Right.
Right
So
now,
I
that's
see
not
Charlotte-
happening for me.
I see
Darlene
Charlotte-
has her hand up, so I'll take hers first.
Charlene Burns.
Yeah. Okay, so your last slide there, present day, we have to include September 30th, that it's that call to action has been achieved, but it's not being recognized by organizations. My son works for EPCOR, and there needs to be a lot more education around the residential school. I'm going to back up and I'm going to tell you myself, I am a residential school survivor, but that will never be my legacy. That legacy belongs to the government and to the churches. So I just want to say that at the onset here. So I do speak from experience for sure. So yeah, that September 30th Orange Shirt Day, it actually has a different name. Somebody else will know the exact formal name of it. Day of Reconciliation or something like that. But it is declared a statutory holiday. So United Church of Canada did give us a statutory holiday. There's a question right now within our organization, the national office, the question of whether to give June 21st, which is Indigenous Day, or this day on September 30th, the Orange Shirt Day. I think the feeling that what I'm hearing is, although us Indigenous people would hope that both days would warrant a holiday, a day to reflect. And that the whole idea there, June 21st, was never meant for people to just simply take a holiday. We were asked as staff to do something, participate in some kind of event. And the pandemic has put a lot of challenge for this kind of thing. We're on Zoom hours and hours per day. And so it's not so likely that staff will go and look for a Zoom call to learn about indigenizing and learning about the experience. But at the same time, I would hope that a few of the 60 people that are online would write to the United Church and say, that you agree with me that we need to recognize both days because we were one of the main churches that was involved. But I have a lot more to say, but I know other people, I want to hear from other people, so I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much for that lovely presentation you both did.
Thank you, Charlene, and thanks for your work. I know Charlene is a national staff person for the United Church Working in Indigenous. I'm not sure of your exact title, Charlene, but I know you do some really important work there. So thank you for that.
Charlene sort of raised the point too that it was on October 1st that the society had invited consultation coordinators and other people that they chose to invite as well to a gathering, and it had to be on Zoom to discuss what the future next steps might be in regards to the Red Deer Cemetery and the role of the society in that. So that was a very worthwhile gathering of 20 or so people that day too. We had hoped that it would be another in-person gathering at the cemetery, but because of the COVID restrictions, we couldn't do that. But it was still well worthwhile to make that a similar presentation to those people too, because we're still finding that there's many people who have not heard the story of the Red Deer Indian Industrial School.
Well, or the story of the remembering the children, because if you'll notice the dates on a lot of our feasts and so on were a decade ago. So the people who came to the store, came to the meeting on the 1st went, "Who are you?" Well, you can't blame them. They were much younger than, well, we were younger too. But, so we sort of have to start again. Well, other than the fact that we have got a marker where we can hold ceremony, and we have done even through the pandemic, doing social distance and doing ceremony, bringing, the elders and being able to gather in that place. And that's, I think it's important that we keep doing that. And reminding people that there have been plagues before, and particularly the Spanish flu, and that was a similar type of thing as this. So it's it's really an ongoing work.
There is
a question. Oh, sorry. You asked a question before about why we do this work, and I'll use Albert's word. He said so that we never forget. Just like that, you said why should we do this kind of stuff? He says just so we never forget.
There have been questions in the chat box about the recording being available, and yes, that will be posted on our Facebook page, and we can circulate the link to that recording in the various ways that we have circulated the invitation as well. And the other question has come from Shirley about how can we be involved in the work of truth and reconciliation now? Can we still do that? And Haley has said one good way to start a personal journey of truth and reconciliation is to read the TRC final summary report, including the 94 calls to action. And there certainly our society is one way that you might tune into different things that are happening, like we did the webinar on the curriculum, and there was a letter writing campaign about the curriculum, and I think that letter writing could still continue because the Department of Education has not trashed that draft curriculum yet, and in fact they're going ahead with piloting it in some schools. So it's a matter of sort of awareness and continuing to learn through a variety of events and building relationships and so forth.
I see Beverly has her hand up.
Hi, I'm so glad I was able to get on finally tonight, and I'm so happy to hear And what Lyle said, especially about never forget. And I think my main thrust with what I'm doing for work for Truth and Reconciliation is to keep these memories at the forefront and keep the awareness going and up front. And don't let people forget about it as the news media moves on to the next big thing. And this is the reason that I wrote the little chapbook. And this is the reason that I'm going to continue to push the book and raise the money so that Remembering the Children Society can keep doing what they're doing, because I think it's excellent and it's important work, and I want to get behind it to 110%. And I will let you know when I'm doing more readings and events. Right now, I've raised $50 from September 30th. We had a small turnout, mainly because of the new restrictions, but I'm hoping that we can book more. The book has gone to the Lacombe Mary Seymour Public Library, so 2 copies are available there. And they cannot do any live programming readings at the libraries currently under these conditions. But as soon as they're lifted, I'm hoping to do more, and I will keep you informed. And like I said, what I want to do with the book is raise money for you and be involved and keep the awareness at the forefront so that no one forgets, not just for Red Deer, but for all the industrial schools and children and survivors across Canada. It's very important work, and I'm so thankful and so emotional and that I can be involved with it. And I only wish there was more that I could do, but this is a start. So I hope that we can continue to keep that going. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Beverly. I'm just watching people kind of fall off our participant, and we're kind of keeping them a little bit over time. So I don't, do we have any more questions?
There's just a question about how to get involved with the society, and I'm just wanting to put Joanne Fairley's email address there in the chat. You can contact her about becoming a member or indicating your interest. And also if you go to our Facebook page and send a private message that way too.
Well, and at some time we'll even figure out how to do e-transfers if you really want to just sort of support us financially, because there is ongoing expenses and so on and so forth that we're going to have, and sometimes we get funded by people and sometimes we can't.
If you send an email to Joanne, she can accept your money. So
always willing to accept the money. Yes.
So I'll just address Pat Seal asked a question about the availability of this presentation. Anybody who wants a copy of the presentation, just send me an email. It's ross.smiley@gmail.com, and I can give you the link. The presentation is basically on Google Drive, and you can access it from there through with the link. Any other questions in the chat that there was a question about how can school boards, how can we get school boards involved? Somebody want to kind of just tell us more about what you want to. It was Terry and Tim, was it? Still there?
Is Haley gone? But you know, the FMNI programs, I guess, is one of the main ones, I guess.
FMNI, can you say more about
First Nations? Oh, help me with this, Haley. First Nation Métis Inuit.
Okay.
Programs, and they through this many school boards have that program. They have staff on that to do the education and promotion of various things. Aboriginal.
So there are quite a few of the calls to action that are addressed that address educational institutions. So that would be a good place to start to look at those calls to action and try and discern what. I'm sorry, just getting a note. Please unmute us. I didn't think you were muted.
I think you have to unmute yourself.
I did set it so that you can unmute yourself.
So-
Allow participants, oh, I'm sorry, I unmuted that.
Ah,
I
bad man.
unchecked that, okay,
That's better.
okay.
Hey, there you go. You got it now. Hey,
Sorry about
Haley, I
that.
was.
I thought I
Haley,
was,
we've,
I thought I was unmuting everybody and I muted everybody. Sorry about
Oh,
that.
I was trying to chat in there for Haley. Let us know. Unmute us. So Haley, I was jumping on there for you.
We were unable to unmute ourselves earlier, but anyhow, yes, definitely both Red Deer Catholic Schools and Red Deer Public Schools are connected with Remembering the Children Society. And Selena Frisley, my counterpart in Red Deer Catholic, is on the webinar tonight as well. And both school districts have a document that they work from since 2015 when the 94 calls to action came out, and they have short-term and long-term goals on how they can answer the calls to action, do their part as a school board. So through the Indigenous education teams at both school boards, there's ongoing work going on, but also always looking for new ideas and ways that we can work with principals and students and teachers in all of the schools within Red Deer and Central Alberta to move forward truth and reconciliation. Thank you. And Selena's on, she might want to add something, but.
Thanks, Haley. Yeah, we're just trying our best. We're connecting with elders and knowledge keepers to move forward in the best way that we can. And I think the best way is to get as much information as we can and educate our staff so that we can work the best that we can with our staff, our students, our families, and yeah. But we're part of this society, and yeah, happy to do the work and work alongside everyone. Thank you.
I see a question from Cody. With the ongoing work on the gravesite, is the long-term plan to make it publicly accessible? Because part of the preservation up to this point has been that it is not accessible. And Cody, it's been a tricky situation since the cemetery site is actually on a creek bank and was owned by one farmer, and it's also partly environmental reserve. And then the site was accessed through another farmer's property. And just recently, the government has negotiated an easement so that people can access the site. But there's still, I think, kind of a condition that you let that person know when somebody is coming. So it's still not fully publicly accessible. And actually, we have some concerns as to whether we'd really want anybody just to drive down there whenever they felt like it. Just it's not secure right now. It's not fenced. It's not marked. So we still have quite a bit of work to do to make it publicly accessible in a safe and respectful way.
So if you look here, this is the Kinnickinnick Creek that goes down. And so basically where this picture was taken from is right from the southern edge of the graveyard. And the graveyard goes about 25, 40 meters north of there. So, and it's right on that edge. So yeah, it's quite, but mind you that also that outcropping hasn't weathered in many years. So it's quite a sight.
I wonder, I kind of suggested we might close just by talking a little bit about, why it is important for us to continue to remember the children now more than 100 years after the school was closed and the last of the children passed away. And one of the things that was helpful to me in thinking my own way through this is that the Professor Park, Augustine Park, who writes about about restorative justice, talks about how colonial relationships tend to suppress grief and suppress the value of people's lives. You know, there's some of the really astonishing callousness of some of the people who were in charge of the residential school system, kind of just saying, "Oh, 50% of them are going to die." I guess that's just, you know, what's the term we use for that? That's collateral damage, I guess would be the word, the phrase. And that's just not acceptable. And so in order to address that kind of colonial mentality, it is important to grieve. It is important to remember. And in the same way that families continue to remember and hold and cherish the lives of their loved ones who have passed on, so we also need to recall the lives of these children who died too young, too early.
Well, if I can make a suggestion, if you could, some of you could come to our annual general meeting and support us that way, because we certainly need that kind of input. One of the things we've got done, most of our executive looked after at this point, but Cecile has done a very, very, very good job for how many years?
13.
13 years. And
but this is the 10th anniversary of the society, so I think it's very fitting that we're telling our story like this.
Indeed, yeah.
To mark that.
So we've so she's been asking that maybe she wants to retire, and I know that our interim president is sort of has some health issues, and so at the moment we seem to have most of our executive together, and Ross says he can write a good letter, but what we need is a recording secretary. So if there's anybody that has some talents that way, you know, that'd be good. And then and any other ideas that you might have. Cecile is graciously going to stay on as our historian. Thank you so much. There's I can't line up all those dates, even though I've been at this since 1987, but I still can't line up the dates. So it's so important that that's here, and also, you know, getting our elders involved is so important. So, but right now we need somebody to be able to scribble down what we talked about and help us keep it straight and give Cecile a break.
Why, Lyle, can you say why you think we need to remember the children?
Oh, I just go back to what Albert said. He says,
yeah, okay. Sorry,
you know, like, I mean, it goes right back to the beginning, because, you know, he was basically saying, you know, these kids are forgotten, you know, and one of the things he complained about at that time, he says that, you know, that man, he said, won't allow us to go to the cemetery and do grave tending. You know, and he was speaking of more senior, and that's why I was a little bit grumpy when those people said go present it with blankets. I'm going, what, really? These guys have been. But you see, that what happened was, and I think one of the most beautiful things in this whole story was when Moore Jr. We presented him with the blanket and the tobacco and so on, and he sort of went, really? We always knew there was a graveyard here. And then he came to the first feast, and he was the last one there, loading tables and chairs onto the back of trucks and doing all of that. So that whole turnaround, I think, was just one of the most amazing stories, at least for me personally. Is one of the things, and having that transformative you know, experiences, you know, because of this.
There's another story as well. When we started talking about what the Moore family thought of the cemetery, Mr. Moore Jr. said that as children, they had always known that the children were there, and every spring they would take wildflowers to the graves.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Cecile, why do you think it's important to remember the children? Why have you given so much of yourself to this work?
Well, I think first of all, people didn't even know their story, didn't know them, didn't know they had been taken from their families and were in school. And so I think first of all, it's important to bring the story to light. Then we can remember them too. So, just like tonight, having the conversation via chat with Dennis and getting more names of who was there and their connection to people to today. And being able to draw that thread of the 7 generations, I think brings home to me that anything I do today is impacting the next 7 generations. And that's a very important principle, I think, for me to really strengthen and abide by in my heart.
Charlene, you're muted.
Yeah, if you want to unmute yourself, it's the microphone, the first little icon. That's how you.
Maybe, oh, maybe not. I guess I'll just add a little bit to what Cecile was saying is because we're about half hour overtime, so I should respect your time. But anyway, and this was something that I guess we forgot. I forgot is that our memory is not necessarily everybody's memory. We've been involved in this for so long that that we think everybody remembers us, but they don't, and so we have to go back and do that. And I see Barbara.
Yeah, thank you. I was just really struck with the image of bringing wildflowers to the grave every spring. And I think remembering is a way of bringing wildflowers, new life every spring to those children.
Yeah, that's beautiful, isn't it?
I think another sentiment that I carry is the reason why all the feasts were on June the 30th, that we had thought about that's when most children got to go home from the school and that they would be set free. And so there was that thought, and there was also the thought about how we worked together because all of the children had gone to school together. So it behooved us as their descendants to work together as well. So that's another principle that we sort of spoke of at nearly every meeting.
Oh, we've nearly lost half of our participants, so I think we should probably wrap this up.
Yep.
Unless, so
Yes.
I was going to light the smudge again, and Ross or Cecile or anyone else who would like to pray at the end of this.
Want to do rock, paper, scissors, Cecile?
You go ahead. I'm still reading in the chat here.
All right. All right, sure. I can close it in prayer. Are you ready for me to do that, or you gonna let me
Absolutely.
know? Okay. Great spirit, source of all life, creator of all things. As the smoke from the smudge rises up, so we raise our hopes and our thoughts to the highest things that we know, the gifts of love, the gifts of of compassion, a gift of kindness. And as we look back, we ask that you also, and as we remember the children, remember the story of this one particular Indian industrial school, recognizing many others across the country, and the stories could be multiplied many, many times. We ask that you also help us to look forward to new relationships with one another, relationships with people who we maybe find challenging, that we might find quite foreign. A new relationship as well with the earth as a whole. Bless this time together. It may contribute to that vision of a right relations, all your relations, all our relations. Amen.
Hey.
Aye, aye.
Thank you, everybody. Fantastic turnout, and it was great to be a part of this.
And there's lots of follow-up to do.
And we've got every single one of your emails, not really. Okay, so I started recording this. Does anybody know how I should stop recording this?
So I just wanted to share with Lyle and Ross and everybody that's involved. I got my third vaccine yesterday.
Yeah.
And it really made my arm sore. I didn't remember how much it does that. And so almost like a 24-hour flu. So I slept from 3 o'clock this afternoon to the time to get online. I didn't want to miss this. And so I'm not feeling all that great tonight. So it's back to bed. But I'm glad I didn't miss it. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
No, glad you came out.
great to see you, Charlene, and give our best to Russell.
For sure. Yeah.
So if I just stop this, will it still go to the cloud like it said it would?
Haley's nodding her
Or
head.
Danny? Okay.
It will, it will.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there we go. We're stopping recording now. Thank you, one and all.
All right.
And okay, cloud recording.
Thanks, everybody.